I must confess, I had so many engagements in Coimbatore that I tried to club them all together, and I have 3 or 4 tomorrow morning. So the selection of this date is down to me. But I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak here, because I think there are 2 or 3 key points, at least from a growth and job creation story, and probably from a competitiveness and the future of our state and our economy, that I'd like to make. I think it's beyond doubt, mathematically at least, that MSMEs are the real engine of growth and of employment. Employment probably is even more important than growth in today's world. If you look across the country, there are many states that have roughly the same per capita income or slightly higher than us. Gujarat, Maharashtra come to mind, Karnataka. But no other state has quite the structure of the economy that we have. If you take Maharashtra, it's hugely concentrated in Mumbai, and a lot of companies' headquarters are based there. You take Gujarat, it's a lot of processing industries and a lot of high value-add industries that makes the GDP look so high. But in fact, there are not that many actual employment opportunities, and there's quite a high disparity. Normally, we measure disparity in economic terms by something called the Gini coefficient, which says what is the spread between the better off and the less well off. And Tamil Nadu is about a 10% lower Gini coefficient than the national average, and places like Gujarat have about 10% higher. Now, you can have low Gini coefficient and be all poor, like Bihar. That's not so great. Or you can be low Gini coefficient and relatively well off, like Tamil Nadu, which is much better. You could also have a high Gini coefficient and be poor. I don't want to name the state. Or you can have a high Gini coefficient and be relatively well off, like Gujarat, which is, again, in my view, not as ideal. Core to this notion of equitable growth, which is something that is in the lifeblood of our movement, the Dravidian movement, which we call for social justice and access for all. Core to that notion is that there should be a wide distribution of the fruits of growth, of development. It's not unique to our movement. It's very integral to the notion of social justice, but I would say it's at the heart of democracy. The notion of one man, one vote goes to some principle of equity, or at least equality of access of opportunity. Most constitutions have that, the US, India, France. And what we can feel proud about in Tamil Nadu is, if you look at either the number of MSMEs, or the number of small manufacturing units, or the number of people who are employed in relatively high-paying jobs like manufacturing, or the percentage of women that are engaged in the workforce, or the percentage of women that are engaged in manufacturing. And all these measures, we stand a league apart from most of the country. Of course, if it ties very closely to our philosophy, we'd like to think that the political climate, and I'm saying all parties that adhere to this philosophy, I'm not making it political, have contributed something to this outcome. But I think it has to be more than that. I think it has to be the culture, the very nature of our society, of the Tamil people going back, thousands of years. From our trader instincts to our skilled craftsmanship, to our culture of inclusion and a global approach to both human relations as well as business. And I think all those are built into this outcome. So the good news is, relatively speaking, we're economically in a good place because of all of this history, some of it innate to our culture and our long legacy, some of it probably due to our politics and the evolution of our political ecosystem. But at some other level, we need to think globally. We are now in an integrated global economy, even after the kind of backlash to globalization that has come about since the 2008 financial crisis, even after the relative unwind I would say we are still in an era of almost hyper-globalism. Now, globalization is not a secular thing. These ups and downs are not unique to our lifetime. If we actually look back at least a few hundred years, in fact, a couple thousand years, you can actually trace peaks and valleys. In the days of the Roman Empire, the world was much more integrated. In the days of colonialism, the world was much more integrated. One of my great-granduncles spent much of his time traveling around the world, I'm saying in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And the British Empire was so well connected that he could be wired funds from Madurai to almost any part of the world, going back 120, 130, 200 years ago. So we have seen probably the new crest of globalization, because this time it involved not just capital, not just goods, but people, delivery of services digitally through cables to all parts of the world. And as I say, even after the pullback a bit, it is not a kind of secular pullback. It is partially driven by the bad effects of trade, which I'll come to in a minute, in some parts of the advanced economy, partly by geopolitics and the problems with China. But you see, trade, and again, we can show this mathematically for those who study macroeconomics or global trade. Deregulation of trade, opening up of trade, removal of barriers, of friction, of tariffs, of duties, almost always increases the efficiency, the output, the total global production of any product or service. That's just mathematically true. What it does not do is guarantee that those outcomes will be split equitably to all. In fact, it almost guarantees that you will end up having some huge winners and some relatively less winners. There's no obvious loser, but if I'm a factory worker and my income stagnates at X, whereas the owner of the company goes up by 5X, I feel relatively that I am a loser because I have not shared in the fruits of growth. And in fact, that's happened. That's happened certainly in the last 3 years, certainly through the globalization of finance, through securitization, derivatization. It has happened through the WTO. It has happened through GATT. It has happened through any number of initiatives and agreements that facilitate global trade, but have not had counterparts that look to create equitable outcomes. So almost any country in the world, economic disparity has risen, in some cases extensively, disproportionately in the last 20, 30 years than it has probably in the 50 or 60 years after the Second World War. So that really is pushing the deglobalization or anti-globalization movement. In places like Tamil Nadu, we have not had such bad outcomes. And for all the negatives that one could argue about some kinds of subsidy or grant schemes, the overall notion of providing grants and subsidies to the lower sections of society has surely helped us keep the disparity lower. Right? The fact that we now, for example, provide breakfast at government schools increases the likelihood of having better nutrition for all, better academic outcomes for all. It'll take 15 years to show up because they have to go through their entire schooling and come out. But these are the kinds of long-term investments that provide a more equitable society. But if we have equity or inequity as the de-levering of global trade, we still are competing in a global environment. So having said all of these caveats, there is not the hyper-global it used to be. The fact is, if I went around this room, anybody who's large enough to have a national market is probably importing something from China. Almost definitely, right? And anybody who's large enough to have an international market, by definition, you're exporting things out of this country. And so you are competing in a market that has multiple players from multiple countries. There's one good news for us all, and that is that China was the kind of buffer or sink of the entire rest of the world for almost 25 years, maybe even 30 years. There was this unwritten agreement that all the manufacturing processes of the world went to China where they could do it faster, cheaper, with more certainty, sometimes with good means, sometimes with coercive means. And therefore, all of this production shifted there, dramatically brought down the cost of goods, dramatically increased the purchasing power of almost everybody, because the goods became so much cheaper, particularly in places like Western Europe, to some extent India, but mostly in the Western world. And in return, China built up these massive reserves of foreign currency and stored them without, destabilizing the global economy. All this money was going there, and they just kept bringing more and more reserves, trillions and trillions of dollars of reserves. Now that trade has started to unwind because there's no new money going into China. Whether the old money is coming out at what pace, you can see based on the liquidation of the reserves of the Bank of China. But clearly, from a new investment perspective, China has not really got that pull. Why is that good news for us? Because no matter how many Vietnams and Indonesias and Malaysias we compete with, there is really no other country in the world that has the kind of scale, the demographics, and the potential that India has. So by default, it is India's golden era. No matter whether we use it or not, that's a different issue. But it is, or it ought to be, India's golden era for at least the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. Some have argued, like me, that we need to seize the window now. Some others have argued that I'm being alarmist. It's okay if it takes us 20 years to do so, because the trends will always be in our favor. As an capital markets participant, I always am hesitant to predict the longevity of trends. So, I'd rather act now while I'm sure it's going my way than assume it'll be going my way for the next 15 years and find that somehow some other disruption, some other variable has affected the mix. So that's one part of the equation. Is it's a golden era for us. What's the second part of the equation? We have to figure out a way to convert what is our single natural strength, which is the talent pool, the scale of young people that we have. How do we convert these into highly productive, globally competitive levels of productivity people? And what kinds of products or services are we going to create or offer in this global economy? Because at least you're going to compete with somebody else who's going to import it. Even if you are not an exporter, somebody else can import the products or do the services remotely. So what is it that you have to do to match the global competitiveness benchmark in your product or your service or your small niche of the industry that you're in? And that's where I think innovation comes in. And I think the single defining variable that probably can transform raw talent into successful outcomes is innovation. And innovation can come in many shapes. It can be adaptation to a particular market or a demand. It can be leapfrogging technology that skips a couple of levels and comes up with a different outcome. It can be the ability to rapidly scale because you're doing something in technology. Think about the Googles of the world and compare, for example, the Google versus the Apple. Whatever Apple does, at the end of the day, still needs to manufacture that many products, and it needs to actually get them from one place to another place, and then it needs to sell them and make money. Google sits in one place and makes money just because they can put their ads on their servers and keep on attracting people to their platform, right? And all they have to do is be alive on the internet. They don't even have to go and put out their own servers or anything like that. So there are many models of innovation. Apple, for example, chose product excellence and branding of that product excellence. And about 20, 25 years ago, when the iPod was kind of reaching its peak of popularity, some were making the argument, now that everybody in the world owns an iPod, what more is it that they can do that will make them bigger than this? Then it turned out that they could innovate more in tablets. They practically created the tablet market. And then said, well, everybody has a tablet now, what more can they do than this? Then it turned out they could do much, much better in phones. And it was almost infinite market, addressable market when you went to phones relative to tablets. Then it turned out almost everybody who could afford a phone had a phone. Now what do? I mean, look at the genius of a company that makes you buy a new phone every year or every year and a half, because they put so many new features into it that you can get enticed into buying this phone. And it amazes me. I'm not one of those people who changes on a regular basis. In fact, I think my laptop I've had now for 10 years. It's a tablet laptop blend. But the ability to convince people to spend thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of rupees to keep on changing a product that probably has a 10-year life cycle every year is a massive skill, and whatever reason they perfected it. There's other kinds of innovation, right? There's innovation in services, there's innovation in delivery, there's innovation in little things. We're talking about, milk and milk products. One of my good friends is Mr. Chandramohan of the Hudson Agro Group. And I've gone and visited many of his facilities now, from ice cream to chocolates to, milk pressing. And he says, the one thing we decided, we wanted to deliver, what was once conceived to be only affordable to rich people, to the common man, and we thought there was a scalable, addressable market there. And that one product, that cassata slice, Arun ice cream cassata slice, transformed the company, because everybody wanted, because otherwise it was only made by hand, where you had to layer all these different types of ice cream and then do it. And of course now they're very clear. They know which product will sell in which market. So they make, Belgian quality chocolate and they sell it in a different brand name in a different market. They sell, regular 10 rupee, 15 rupee chocolate for the mass market. They sell ice cream in 2 or 3 different brands. They have done now perfect market segmentation as we used to be taught in business school. And in my mind, that is a massive story of innovation as well. So I think if you look at Tamil Nadu's strengths and Tamil Nadu's need, is very clear. Our strengths are that we are a relatively equitable, relatively distributed, relatively, educated workforce economy. MSMEs have and always will be the engines of job creation, and job creation to me in some ways may be more important than growth. If the growth doesn't involve job creation and therefore equitable distribution, that kind of growth is dangerous. It should lead to, or it could lead to, social problems. And in our case, our statistics are very clear. With the guidance director seated here, I'll tell you that if you look at the last at least 7 years or 8 years that I've been in MLA, it takes, several lakhs, maybe 30 lakhs up to create one job in a large global manufacturing entity or any of the deals that we do through guidance. And every single year in the assembly demand for grants, we show that roughly 1.5 lakh rupees of capital create a job in the MSME sector. Now that's not quite apples to apple comparison, because there are different paying jobs with different benefits and different potential for second order, third order job creation, but still the scale is that different. It's 20x, 30x. So particularly for MSMEs, I think the government really goes all out of its way. We have things like the Tamil Nadu Startup Mission. We have the equivalent of MSME facilitation bureaus in every district. It is clearly our priority, our Chief Minister's priority, that growth should be equitable across regions, across districts. He says that all the time. And MSMEs can, by definition, come up everywhere. Don't have to come up only in the big cities. And I think for MSMEs, it is still a hugely competitive market. There is no way you can compete with somebody who can make things much faster or at much larger scale, and therefore reduce the marginal cost or the per unit cost. But through innovation and through leveraging technology to scale in a way that you could not before, I think MSMEs can really, in some cases, use their agility, their ability to make decisions quickly and implement them immediately, because just a small organization doesn't require the kind of lumbering processes, cumbersome processes of a large corporate to increase their competitiveness. So at a philosophical, at a macro, even at a political philosophy level, my chief minister's government, our ministries, we are all very aligned to the notion of MSME support, of innovation, capital support, of training, of mentoring. In many large companies provide mentorship programs for MSMEs, and I'm encouraging some more of that through the technology platforms that we have. And talent development, where again the government will provide skill training or continuing training for people in particularly in the MSME sector, which is a way we can make them more competitive. So we have a lot of programs. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the menu with me, but I let my colleagues who are more permanent government employees rather than a temporary politician like me who comes and goes. I let them address those things. And thank Deepali once again for inviting me. Thank all of you for coming. And encourage you, to think out of the box. If my career has taught me anything, the future is bright for people who can think beyond the paradigm or the construct they put into. So innovation is surely the epitomization of that. And I wish you all a successful and thought-provoking event, and all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you.